hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm a little bit compromised, so. Well, first of all, it's my blessing and privilege to be with you this evening and to see so many of you again for the first time in a long time. So I'm sorry that happens. Tonight you asked me to speak for a little bit. Let me go for about 35 minutes or so, and then we can open this up for discussion. How do you become a saint? Or does it mean to be holy? Now, on March the 19th, 2018, Pope Francis issued something that's called an apostolic letter. It's not the same thing as an encyclical. An encyclical is a formal teaching to the church. An apostolic declaration or letter perhaps is a step down from that. But I think when it comes to Pope Francis, anything he says is worthwhile listening to. And the apostolic letter was entitled Gaudete et Exsultate. And that's the Latin for a little phrase that comes from the Psalms, rejoice and be glad. Now, as many of you have discovered over the journey of your own spiritual life, that oftentimes when people think of religion in general, and unfortunately many times if they think of Catholicism in particular, they immediately get somber, sad, ritualistic, legalistic, and rigid. So it's quite refreshing to have a Pope who writes a letter called Rejoice and Be Glad. Because one of the signs of the Holy Spirit moving in our lives is joy. One of the signs of the Holy Spirit living in our lives is serenity of heart, or a certain sense of gladness. It does not mean that we don't know what's going on in the world. It does not mean that our hearts are not broken by the events of the world. But as you know, many times when people come together for religious activity, it's not a few times when they begin to think this is an opportunity to explore our sins, to discover what's wrong, to become harsh in our judgment towards selves, and God forbid, to become judgmental of others. I would hope and pray that the following of Jesus in our lives, both at the church and as individuals, would be a cause of joy. The way I look at religion is a way of falling in love. And if you fall in love with God, who fell in love with you, then that's going to change the way you see, understand, and think other people. Because as you know, you never met anybody that God didn't create. Nor did you ever meet anybody that God doesn't love. But oftentimes, in the way we talk, politically, culturally, religiously, instead of rejoicing in the presence of another person, we can be somewhat condescending, condemning, intolerant. And if any of you in this room have ever been the victim of intolerance, disrespect, or ever had somebody look down their nose upon you as if you were inferior, then you know how important it is to lift other people up who are well adjusted to being put down. So I like to think that the gift of the Spirit living in our lives is the gift of joy, the gift of happiness, the gift of gladness that lifts us up so that in every circumstance of life we might be a source of the lifting up of other people. And here's one of the ways you might do that. When you look at the morning news, go to the internet to see what's going on. Turn on the radio, the TV, or for those of us who live in the 18th century, read a newspaper. Undoubtedly, you're going to find news that breaks your heart. That makes you wonder if the end isn't coming soon. That tempts you to despair. And oftentimes you will see people in the news that are very easy to put down and put out. And while we should challenge them for their wrongdoing, confront them for their evil policies, we should never demean them. We should never take away from them their humanity. And perhaps in a prayer, in a thought, in a reflection, we could lift them up even if they put themselves down. Most of us have been around long enough to know that sometimes people go out of their way to irritate you. People go out of their way to put themselves down. Those are the people who need us the most. So tonight, in speaking with you, I want to make very clear that we're not talking about some kind of abstract spiritual principle by which we become holy in some kind of otherworldly sense. Holiness directs itself to this life and to our relationship one to another. It has as its model no less than Jesus Christ. Let me take this in stages. Why did Pope Francis, issue an apostolic letter called Rejoice and Be Glad that had the subtitle, The Quest for Holiness, or what it means to be a saint? Because holiness, sanctity, sanity, and being a saint are somewhat the same. Way back when I was in high school, the Catholic Church had an event called the Second Vatican Council. And in that council, the Church Fathers reflected for one of the first times in history on the nature of the Church precisely in church. And in the great document, Lumen Gentium, known as the Constitution on the Church, they had a chapter, and it was on holiness. Now, when I was a little boy, I thought holy people were statues. You could go visit them in the church. They were statues. Then I thought maybe if you wanted holiness, go see a priest, go see a bishop, go see a pope, go see a nun. Then you would have holiness. And not a few people in the church thought that precisely. That holiness has something to do with people who, to some degree, cut themselves off from everyday life and lived in monasteries, convents, cathedrals, parishes, apart from the rest of us. In the Second Vatican Council, it said that holiness was the quality of the church, something that belonged to the church by virtue of it being founded in Jesus Christ. That it did not simply belong to a particular group of people within the church, because when you look at it, with all due respect, some of the holiest people in your family are not the priest, but your grandmother, or your uncle, or the person down the street. So the Second Vatican Council took us back to a New Testament teaching. And Pope Francis, after all these years, has decided that many of the teachings of the Council need to be restated in our time. And in restating what this quest for holiness is, he reminds us of the fact that holiness does not belong to a few. It does not belong to the priest, the nun, the brother, the sister, the bishops, the Pope. It belongs to all of us. And in the first instance, we're not holy because of what we achieve or what we do. We're holy because we're loved by God. You ever hold a baby in your arms? What did the baby ever do to deserve your love? What did the baby accomplish to deserve your respect? If anything, the baby works you to death. Can't sleep, yells and screams whenever it wants, demands food on demand. What credentials does a baby have to be loved other than it's occasionally cute? I was on an airplane the other day, and of course, I get on the airplane first, because I push everybody out of the way. And I try to find a seat where it will be quiet in the back of the plane. There's 900 empty seats. A family comes in with a baby and sits right behind me. Or next to me, with the baby head in my lap. I don't want a baby. I don't want your baby. Go sit somewhere else. And all the way through the flight, I'm trying to sleep. I'm trying to study. I'm trying to pray. I'm trying to read the Bible. I'm trying to be holy. And there's this little, whatever it is, screaming and yelling. Finally, his head rested on my arm. Because you know how the seats are, they're so wide. And the baby goes to sleep on my arm. And the mother said, I think he likes you. Well, that makes one of us. And I started being cute. I began to fall in love with this little guy. You go sleep now, because I'm not going to move this arm for the next 700 miles. So what's the resume? What did the baby do? The baby had needs. The mother loves the child because the mother loves the child, not because the child did something. Quit trying to get God to do something. Many of us think that the religious life is that we try to get God to do something that God otherwise wouldn't do. You'll love me if I say this prayer. You'll love me if I jump through this hoop. You'll love me if I celebrate this. You'll love me if I believe that. Everything we pray, everything we do, everything we celebrate is to thank God for God's love. The Bible puts it this way in the first epistle of John. In this that we have the love of God, not that we have loved God, but that God has first loved us. Long before that baby can say to his mother, thanks. Long before that baby can say to his father, job well done. Long before that baby can say to a perfect stranger, thank you for your arm. That baby is loved. As a matter of fact, the mother started getting upset and was apologizing for the baby's crying. And about 25 people on the plane started singing a lullaby. There's something that comes from within. One woman a few rows over said, "Oh, I know what it's like to take kids on a trip. Don't you worry, honey. We'll all help the baby to sleep." I thought I was in a flying cathedral. All of us have been in situations where something goes wrong or something's irritating, and people erupt in anger and displeasure. But sometimes it happens, and maybe more times than we think, when people respond with kindness and love. And I noticed something about the people who were responding. They were responding authentically. They were themselves. And if you look at Pope Francis's letter, Gaudete et Exsultate, and we don't have time for this, over 100 pages long, but it's extremely readable. You can get it on the Vatican website free. In the paragraphs I gave you today, on the first part of the notes, the white sheet of notes, you have a few paragraphs from the apostolic exhortation for which the Pope says something astounding. He says the essence of holiness, the essence of what it is to become a saint, is to be yourself. And if you think being yourself is easy, try it. It's not being your mood. It's not being reactive. It's being yourself. It's an astounding thing to say. You know how you can look at Mother Teresa of Calcutta and say, "There's a saint." You can look at Dorothy Day. There's a saint. You can look at Oscar Romero. There's a saint. But the Pope points out to us what saints recognized, celebrated, and lived was their need for God. They never stood before God and said, "I have my act together. I believe everything that has to be believed. I'm just perfect." Sometimes people think holiness is perfection. No, it isn't. Oftentimes perfection is irritating. You ever be with anybody that has to do everything perfectly? You put a glass down on the table, they move it to 1 inch to the left. You set a plate and they reset it. It's very, very important for us to understand that sanctity, holiness, and sainthood is not perfection. It's radical openness. It is, in fact, the awareness that I'm not perfect. The awareness that I stand before God, always in need of God's love, always in need of God's grace, and I stand before other people, always in need of their presence as much as they may be in need of my help. Does that make sense? So you got to get out of this idea. Don't take the saints that we have, the ones that are canonized, and they have liturgies and feast days, and think that they are the perfect. The last thing a saint would ever tell you is that they're perfect. They would tell you they reflect the perfection of God, which is pure love. Some of us can only love those who love us. Some of us can only respect those who love us. Some of us can only tolerate those who tolerate us. But God's tolerance, love, and respect is unbounded. That's why sometimes in the quest for holiness, we hand another person over to God. When I remember that the person I dislike is loved by God, then I remember I'm loved by God. maybe we can find a way to be at peace.